Well, hey Archons, what's going on? It's another episode of KeyThoughts, my weekly vlog on my musings of this great game of KeyForge. And this week we got a couple things on the books. So of course we're going to be doing a card of the week, and it's going to be a Dark Tidings card, as has been the theme these past couple of weeks since the set came out. And I also want today to talk about the Tide mechanic as the main topic, as well as a little bit of food for thought with the idea of how a new set impacts you as a player. And then I'm going to finish off with the card of the week and give a shout out to some new Patreon supporters that have joined the ranks for the deck giveaways. So, first off, I hope everyone enjoyed their Star Wars Day. I sure did. My favorite mug here, R2-D2. I'm also, if you can't see, rocking my Star Wars shirt, which I love. And watch Bad Batch, the very first episode, and pretty badass show, I must say. I enjoyed it. But we're here for KeyForge, not Star Wars. So, moving forward with the idea of a new set coming into the mix. This is the warm-up topic before we get into the Tide itself. And some things I've thought about is the time you spend with a set. Because I find when a set first comes out, you have the ability to not truly understand the power of the early decks you possess, because you are not yet familiar and you have that natural way of progressing with the cards in a new set and how they interact with one another. So there's things that you may miss in your early plays with certain decks, and you put them down and you don't come back to them. Especially, well, I don't know if I would say especially with the lack of SAS, because I think when SAS comes into play with Dark Tidings, it's going to make people look at decks that they maybe overlook just on the score, and they'll take another gander at those. But I think in general, when SAS first comes out with a set, whatever happens early on does not always reign true as time progresses, and we see it kind of settle into the fold of both the meta and just how it interacts in general and how people understand the cards and their strengths. So that's always a thing that can affect the way you perceive a certain deck at any given time, between release and down the road to having a lot more experience and understanding of how it plays. So with that in mind, I think that you need to take time with a set and see what happens. Allow it to kind of percolate and just do its own thing and get there in the end. Because if you are patient and allow the growth to happen, it's always fun to go back. Like I've even enjoyed going back to different decks from sets from the past where they were early on, and now just my general experience with the game is greater, so therefore that increased knowledge and wisdom can go back and find a deck to play differently than when I originally went for it, just because of my own ability to recognize things. So that's always a really fun thing in this great game of KeyForge. Now, on to the main topic, the Tide. This is definitely one of the most interesting things that have happened to the game of KeyForge. Now, I know a lot of people don't think much on the way that the Tide could be because it's very set dependent. But I think it is actually one of the most well thought out aspects of KeyForge, and great evolution for the game, because it is a handicap you must take on, a price you must pay in order to get a benefit. And it creates such an interesting opportunity cost for the effects of your cards. And as a result of the Tide, I feel that any cards you have that can raise the Tide instantly are regarded as part of an efficiency stat in your deck. And early on, when I've been putting my ratings on my deck openings, I have not really taken the Tide into account, but lately, the past couple, I've started anything that will raise the Tide also counts towards your efficiency stat, because of the fact that you will not be taking chains. So therefore you will be drawing more cards. And because I think you can't really count it as a negative, the tide mechanic. I guess you could. The more tide stats you have, or I guess it's kind of a delta. So it's the amount of cards that require the tide plus your ability to raise the tide equals whatever your negative efficiency will be, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it. And I'm going to have to muse on this a little bit more, and I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on this. But right now, I'm kind of looking at it, if it raises the tide, then it creates more efficiency because you're not going to have a reduction in your efficiency because of chains. I'm very intrigued as I've played more at my, I guess, thriftiness with the tide. I'm trying to be more efficient in the way that I use the tide. Before, I would take it willy-nilly and just grab those chains like it was nothing. But now I find I'm looking at the opportunity cost a little bit more closely, and I find it very interesting. And more so, I'm also finding it extremely interesting when I'm playing decks that are not from Dark Tidings, and the tide is something that I need to mitigate for my own, I wouldn't say advantage, but so I don't have a disadvantage. And it's very interesting. I can't wait to explore this further and see how my thoughts progress with the tide mechanic, how things occur over time, and how it settles, because it is without a doubt one of the coolest things that's happened in the game. And I'm very curious how this is going to be used further, because this 38th card that now exists, which has the mechanics written on one side and then the tides on the other, has been spoken of as a new design element within the game. There is now an extra card that can be utilized in a global way. So I'm very curious how this will be developed further. I mean, the Crucible obviously has different terrains, and we are in the sea and the oceans of the Crucible brought this on. So I'm wondering what other things could have happened. Like maybe there's the desert, maybe there's mountains, things like that can be utilized. Maybe there's going to be something like a city-themed deck or world that we were exploring more, because there is New Hub City exists. Maybe they have something that revolves being in the city in some way as we go down the line. So I'm very curious to see how this just keeps progressing over time, because it's without a doubt very interesting. The tide is very interesting, and I am super pumped for that. Now let's go on to the Patreon supporters before we get to the card of the week. So this week I had Peter Hardy join the ranks of people whose names will be in the deck draw, as well as my man Scott Scrouner upped his amount, so he's going to have a few more in the mix for drawing it. So I appreciate everyone. We got a good number now. I think we can start moving to this month to doing 2 deck giveaways instead of just 1. And I think I may use the bag of decks as a way of doing it, so you don't know what set it's coming from. No way to know. It's just going to be a random draw. We'll see what it is, and I'm very excited for this. I appreciate some of you who said I don't have to send the decks. You'd rather just have the QR code, and if you really need it for a tournament or something like that, then we can cross that bridge of sending it. That helps me, and I just really appreciate everyone's support on this. I'm excited to give away decks, actually. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to play decks on stream. It's always a good time. And now let's move on. Oh, one last thing. I want to thank everyone who's been submitting questions for the Call of Discovery Help from Future Self Quiz Showdown, which will be recorded this weekend. So I think I'm going to have the link in this video. It may not be live after a certain amount of time because the cutoff will be coming in the next day or so. But if you want to get those questions in, please jump on that. We love everyone's participation in this momentous occasion, which is now an annual thing. So now let's get on to the final segment of the show, which is the card of the week. And this week it is a logo action card called Final Analysis. Okay, for those of you who don't know this card is so bonkers. It says play, destroy each creature. Each player draws a card for each creature they controlled that was destroyed this way. So Final Analysis is very cool for a number of reasons. One, DataForge exists in this set. So Final Analysis can very much so get DataForge off way easier than it ever has. Secondly, is that doing it gives your opponent an advantage, but it's also a board clear. So you have the opportunity cost in this card that says if your opponent has a board that you can't deal with, You just got rid of it, but you also gave them the advantage of having a ton of cards in hand, which means a lot of answers to potentially what you are doing. So the opportunity cost with this is maybe one of the best in the game, because you're not only board wiping, you're also drawing cards. So there's this interesting moment to pull this off when you could go, I want to pull this off so it has the least efficiency for my opponent drawing cards and the most efficiency for me drawing cards. Or you have to look at it that my opponent's board is way too big and out of control and I'm just going to lose the game. So I need to actually blow up the board, and my opponent's going to get a bunch of cards, unfortunately, but it makes sure that they can't run away with the game based on the board state that they have. It's so fascinating and so interesting. The other thing you could always do is actually use wards to allow your opponent to not be able to draw some more cards because you're destroying wards and not the creatures. So that's another way that it works, where maybe you're going to leave your opponent with some less stuff, less cards to draw, but maybe have a couple more creatures on the board. So some really interesting decision making to have with this card. I think you obviously want to use it. I don't think there's ever a time you're not using it, but I think the decision space between timing and the opportunity cost is really interesting. I've had times where I've had it early on, and I was like, oh, I want to wait till I get a couple more creatures out, and then what happens is my opponent actually gets more creatures out, so I'm now like, oh crap, I just lost that ability to really go forward with what I wanted. So tricky stuff there. Tricky stuff. It's a great card for that reason, and I love it to combo off with Data Forge, and there's some other cards. I think Ruins of Arcanus, which says if you after you play your 6th card, you get 4 Ember basically. I think that is something that can be very interesting with final analysis, because it could work both ways. So that's where the opportunity cost really comes into play. So that's going to do it for this week, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know your thoughts on this week's topic. And as always, may your Ember never be stolen and your keys forged promptly. Have a good one.